So let's open it up and let our good friend Phil Carroll open it up and do a quick introduction and get the ball rolling. Phil?
Thanks so much, Brad. So we're here on day two of the first ever virtual Bucks Fever Film Fest. Super excited because we have Doug Torres here to discuss with us today about his extensive film career and hopefully share some great actionable tips for the filmmakers in the audience. Torres is a Bucks County resident who's worked on such feature films as Two Lovers, The Immigrant, and 12 Years a Slave, The Lost City of Z, and Ad Astra, as well as Netflix hit Bright. His upcoming projects include The Woman in the Window with Amy Adams, Deep Water featuring Ben Affleck, and the three-part adaptation of R.L. Stine's Fear Street for Netflix. Doug, thank you so much for coming here today to speak with us.
I really thank all of you guys for inviting me. You know, these type of film festivals like this, where we can reach out to the local storytellers. You know, I just love to be able to help out when I can.
Oh, thank you. That's awesome. So to get started, how did you get involved in the film industry?
Well, I always tell people when they ask me the question, I say there is no direct route to getting to where I've gotten and how you start. I started out as a writer. I loved writing. And then I decided, I was living in New York City and I was a bartender at the time. And I decided, hey, I think I'll be a better writer if I understand how movies are made. So this was in the early 90s. And there was a lot of the independent film scene was happening at that generational moment in New York. And I just started working for free on sets, to kind of learn how movies were made, so to speak. And then one thing led to another. I started working more. The music video wave was exploding in New York, particularly the hip hop music video scene. And I found myself in the right place at the right time with the right people. And, my film school was doing things for Biggie Smalls, Jay-Z, Tupac, Wu-Tang Clan. That was my film school, learning and working with directors and cinematographers as a first assistant director. And then, it's that type of thing. This business, I always tell people, is a bunch of concentric circles. The more you work, the more people you meet, the more people you meet, the more you work. And all of a sudden you get to 25 years later and you're like, wow, I've kind of had a career.
And for everybody in the audience that doesn't know what an assistant director does, could you kind of explain what your role is on set?
I mean, at the feature level, which is pretty much all I do these days, the best way to explain it is, in military terms, if the director is the general, the first AD is the lieutenant colonel. He's the one, who's kind of issuing the orders and getting the army to move, So essentially, from the base level, what I do is early on in a project, I'm given the script and I break the script down. Breaking the script down implies, okay, we're going to get it into all its components to figure out how to shoot this thing. How many days is it going to take? It becomes a massive three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. You have certain actors that can work this spread. You've got certain locations that can work this spread. And you have to kind of put it all together to say, okay, this is the best, smartest way to shoot this movie. Then that is given a price tag. And then usually the price tag is too high. So they say less days, cut it down, cut it down. That's how it all works. And so essentially that's in the preparation aspect of the prep cycle of a movie. Then once we get shooting, essentially, I've organized the day into components. So the only thing the director has to do is worry about the actor's performance. Everything else layers beyond the actor's performance. If you're inside a restaurant, the other 18 people sitting there, the people cooking a meal coming, the people walking outside, a cab that might stop and people come out, all the way down to, the smoke that's coming up from the deep fryer in the back. These are all elements that I make sure departmentally everyone's prepared for. So, we can create the liveliest frame possible, and the director only has to worry about actor performances. So that's essentially what I do.
You're like the unsung hero on set, behind the scenes. It's incredible.
Yeah, pretty much. And then a lot of people don't realize it too. A lot of the directors that I work with, whenever you see behind the scenes, I'm actually the guy who calls action and cut. And the director just kind of sits at the monitor watching performance. So people see behind the scenes of movies I've done. They're like, yeah, I see you directing that thing. And I'm just because I'm calling the action and the cut, I'm actually that tells everyone, okay, let's get the ball rolling. All right, let's stop and, discuss what we just shot, while the director kind of just takes it all in at the monitor.
Sure. I'm curious, as a independent filmmaker myself, I'm always conscious about the time that we have because it's always limited on a lower budget. And for you, your career has spanned, all budget ranges. How do you decide, I guess, how hard to push the director to move on, if, time's running short? Like, how do you juggle that?
Well, essentially, and I think the reason I've been successful, particularly myself in my job, is that I'm a filmmaker at heart, right? As I said, I started out as a writer. I'm not a clock watcher, but organizing the day is part of my job. And then giving creative support. For me, the way a film set works is that it's a triumvirate, right? It's the director, the DP, and the first AD. Those three people craft and sculpt, the moment to moment and day to day. So the truth of the matter is it's all about just being smart, being creative. And yes, it's like being suggestive about the direction we should go in. But at the end of the day, it's the director's movie. Like I've always had directors say to me, it's like, it's their name above the title. If their movie bombs, I can easily go and get another movie, so essentially there's a lot of things at play. So, when you have directors who understand this, they like are part of the solution, right? Rather than creating the problem and saying like, no, I'm going to stay here for 42 more takes and then we're not going to shoot anything else, Now, there are a handful of directors in Hollywood who get away with that, but for the most part, everyone, has been coached that, you have to be mindful of the budget. At the end of the day, especially in everything from the independent system to the studio system, even if you're an independent filmmaker, someone has bestowed money upon you to make your dream come true. Okay. So it is incumbent upon you to keep that in mind and be cognizant of how that money is spent and the best way to allocate it. And the most expensive aspect of making any movie is the shoot day, right? Time is money. So, it becomes a group effort to make the smartest decisions possible in the sake of time.
How did you go from managing small music video crews to these 100+ crews on the Hollywood level feature films?
Well, at the time when I was doing the music videos, they were not small crews. Music videos are small now, but back in the day, I was doing $2, $3, $4, $5 million videos. So they were huge. We were flying all over the world. That was in the days of the '90s with MTV. That is how artists sold albums. This is before downloading this, that, and the other. So that was the marketing budget for every album went into making the video, right? So it was, in a lot of ways, it was a good progression because, those were on bigger scales. And I started doing some smaller indie movies. And the truth of the matter is, like I always say, is that the budget doesn't matter because at the end of the day, as I've said before, it's about the small creative group that's making the project. If you have a crew of 200, 300 people, that's like the outside layers that are taking care of, many different aspects. If you're shooting a simple movie that's just kind of like, about characters and dialogue, you don't have stunts, you don't have special effects, you don't have visual effects, the money is spent in a particular way. If you're shooting a different type of movie that's more action based, you have bigger crews and money is spent in a different way where you might even have 2, 3, 4 different units running simultaneously. So a lot of times the easiest part is the first unit that's just working with the actors, and the hardest part are the different stunt units that are going around with all of the stunt doubles for all the chases. So, it's at the end of the day, it's just about, the creative aspect of telling the story.
Sure. No, that's great. For you, was there a project that was your biggest stepping stone in your career to getting where you are now?
Probably the movie that I came, as I said, I was in the music video phase, and then I worked on music videos with a director named Charles Stone, who I ended up doing a portion of a movie that he did that actually Jay-Z produced that was called Paid in Full. But that relationship with Charles, then he got a studio movie called Drumline. So Drumline was the movie that I essentially went into the DGA for, and the first studio movie that I did. So in lots of ways, I would look to Drumline. I was about 29 years old at the time, as a first AD on a major, studio movie. I was very much on the young side to be a first AD of a project that big, where, it was, thousands of extras. It was a stadium. It was a movie about college marching bands. So I would point to that movie, and then for a different reason, probably a movie called We Own the Night, which was the first movie that I did with James Gray, which was a period movie about, it's kind of like a Godfather type story about a New York cop family. And I point to that movie because I've since gone on and done 6 more movies with James. So James has been I've been an incredible collaborator with him. So in that aspect, that movie, because it was the first project I did with James.
Okay.
Very cool.
Awesome. How does one become an assistant director? Is there a certain track in the industry?
There is, but it's not the one I took. The track is what happens on, especially in the studio level, is you put X amount of days as a PA on set, right? I think it's maybe 600 or 700. Then from there you go in as a second, and then you kind of, work your way up, so it's incredibly long and time consuming. It's a true, real apprentice program, so to speak, that trains people for that. But since I was a first AD in the non-union world out of the gate, at the time, I don't know if the DJ still has it, there used to be a provision where if you worked a certain amount of days as a first AD non-union, you could automatically go into the DGA as a first AD. So that's kind of how I did it. It's really not done anymore because the Directors Guild, which is the DGA, they go so far down into small and micro budget movies. But back in the 90s, the DGA was only responsible for movies that were signatory, which was just the studios. Like, for example, Miramax was never signatory, right? So all Quentin Tarantino's movies, everything Quentin Tarantino did up until Inglourious Bastards, he was not a member of the Directors Guild because the studio, Miramax itself, did not have a DGA signatory. Now, Quentin made tons of money because he was a producer on those movies, but his staff was not in the DGA. So, the DGA, it was a different way. The DGA, its tentacles go so deep now that really the process of just going in as a PA or going in as the DGA also has like a program where you can go and study for like 2-3 years and get assigned things, but that's very exclusive. But that's for most part the way people get in now is you got to put in your days and as an apprentice.
Okay. Now, I've also noticed on your resume you've gone into producing over the past few years as well. Can you talk a little bit about what you do as a producer?
Well, a lot of it has come because of the relationship of the directors that I work with over and over again. So I kind of get involved in a project earlier on. It has to do with the way that I work with certain directors and the amount of trust and authority that I'm given. It's just another way of saying, hey, you're extra important to this project. We'll give you this credit. We'll give you a little bit extra money, because of the job that you do. It's not necessarily that I have that many more things that I'm responsible for. It just has to do with the way over the years that I've approached my job. Everyone's like, okay, you're this type of person. And there's a handful of us within the industry, first ADs, who get different types of producer credit, and that has to do with the way that we do our job and the relationship we have with the director we work with.
Okay. Oh, that's awesome. So it's almost like an accolade then in your career when you reach that point of, responsibility.
It is. And then what happens sometimes too is because there's some people who've done it and then you just cross over to becoming a full-time producer. It's that type of thing where once you build credits upon it, then you become like a producer. Some people have gone that route. Some people have, stayed the route where some people become directors after. It's just once again, as I said, it's like it's such a meandering road. Nobody really travels on it the same way.
Sure. Yeah, that's show business, I feel like.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Working with a Netflix production now, they're a newer player. Are they any different than the studios that you've worked with?
They're not per se. It all depends upon when I did Bright for them. That was their first real big tentpole movie, their first $100 million action movie. And they were nowhere near as big as an entity as they are now. I mean, they were as Netflix, but they weren't as, they didn't have as many people working for them in the production space as they do now. It's a very small department. So they just kind of let David Ayer, who was the filmmaker, they were like, okay, they're excited to have him. He had, Suicide Squad coming out. So they were like, all right, let's get in bed with you and let's do this kind of, fantasy thing. Their goal was to, and it still is, it just has to do with actor schedules and everything, turn it into like a multi franchise movie franchise, So they were very hands off, let it be, which is usually not the case with studios that have creative executives. Netflix has now become much more of similar to a studio where they'll have creative executives around who have input. They are the new studio, they are the new entity. The project that I did, the R.L. Stine one you mentioned, which was a trilogy that we shot, that was not an original Netflix production. That was actually Fox before the Disney merger. And then post Disney merger, Fox decided because of the content of it that it wasn't, or Disney rather, decided it wasn't a thing for Disney Plus, for them to put on Disney Plus. And the producer of it had ended up, once Fox kind of dissolved, his deal, he got it picked up at Netflix. So then he just took the project over there. So we had zero involvement from Netflix. That was all after fact while the movie was in post that they picked it up for distribution, since, they're just hungry for content.
Sure. Okay. Kind of on that same thinking route now. What's the difference between working on more of a drama type film like 12 Years a Slave versus the effects heavy films like Ad Astra and Bright?
There's, obviously a lot of the effects heavy films, especially when you're doing a space movie, it's very time consuming dealing with zero G and things like that. So it's the understanding of how long it's going to take to do things. How are you going to do things? How many sets do you have to build horizontal? How many sets do you have to build vertical? Because, in space movies, which you want to hang actors on wires for the least amount of time possible, right? It's just, you get nothing done. So what you try and do is you build sets that lie like this for all the close-ups, and you cheat them kind of like, being wheeled around and stuff like that. And then you'll go to a set like this on wires for a few shots of them where it looks like they're kind of in a big wide shot traveling from one end to the other, right? So that becomes a skill set to understand how to do that, because that's much more of a visual effects laden thing. Drama movies are, there's often times where you capture lightning in a bottle because you have the liberty to show up and see how a scene reveals itself, or see how an actor wants to play a scene, and you go with it, right? But in something that's very stunt heavy or visual effects, where you've got previs, where you've got stunt doubles doing other stuff, it becomes very clinical. You got to kind of have to go by the book, because it's like, okay, no, we only have, you can only afford X amount of wire removal shots or this, that. You can't start inventing things, whereas when you're dealing with a drama, you can let the scene reveal itself and see what the actors bring to it and change the blocking and find a new way to move the camera. But in a stunt or visual effects laden movie, you kind of have to lay out a previs and go by it at least 90%. Like, okay, that's where the camera angle is because that's where we said it was going to be in the computer model. That makes sense for this, that, and the other.
How involved are you in the previs process with the director?
On Ad Astra, since as it was a project with James Gray, and it was one of the movies I got a producer credit on, very, very involved. So, from the very beginning, James would be in previs sessions, and there's like a whole previs team, they're like a computer team. You kind of go in there as the director, you've got the set laid out, you've got camera models, you've got little people, you can say, okay, put the camera on a 27, come over here. It's kind of, it's for, certain directors excel at it, certain directors don't, obviously the ones who do, a lot of the big actiony, the Marvel movies, this, that, and the other, that's how all those things are done. There's like virtual cameras and set things where they figure out how a lot of that action is done, which is what you need for the stunt team and for visual effects, especially so you understand handoffs between, okay, this is what we're shooting practical, then at this moment it becomes a visual effect when this thing happens, or add this to the background. So the previs aspect is very important so that everyone really just sees it as a little movie before you actually go and shoot it.
Okay. Oh, that's awesome. We just got a question come in, so I'm just going to change gears here for a second. This is a good one. Luke Whitney asks, I'm a senior in high school and really want to make movies. I personally want to be a DP, but as someone in high school, most likely not going to college, what would you say is the best advice to do to prep for my life after school?
Well, I think what you need to do is um, you need to get yourself in a community of filmmakers, and young filmmakers your age, and start working with them. This is how everyone does it. And if you go to film school, that's the main thing that's valuable about film school, is putting you in touch with other people who are like-minded and doing it. But I do believe in the way that the internet has taken over the ability for storytellers to make and distribute their own movies, that there's communities and people you can find locally who, whether it's they're shooting music videos or they're shooting shorts and they need someone to, be a DP, you just kind of got to get out there and start doing it, and even if it's just at first kind of shooting your own stuff to let people know what your eye is like. Look at cinematographers and movies that you like, understand how they did things, understand how they dealt with lenses for depth of field, understand how they use light. You can create your own film school just by watching, what other people have done, and taking some of those ideas and just putting yourself in a position to tell people, hey, I shoot, and then have people bring you on. I mean, it's going to start very small, but that's the way to do it. And then you start to build a portfolio of work, and then that's how people recognize you, get to know you.
Doug,
Go ahead.
what's your opinion on film school? Because we were having a discussion yesterday amongst the panelists on the filmmaking panel about whether or not it was worth the debt today to go to film school versus just starting out as a PA and then working on your own projects.
I think that film school is a colossal waste of money. I do. It just, I never went to film school. I know some people who did. I know some people who didn't. I also think that generationally, for me, I'm 50 years old. Other filmmakers I know who are 50 years old and have made it and went to film school, it was a different animal, right? In the 80s and the 90s, you had UCLA, USC, NYU. You had maybe 5 places to go, right? And those were the feeder things for people within the industry. Now there is almost every school has a film school virtually, and obviously, yeah, if you went to NYU or if you went to USC, is that maybe going to give you a leg up? Sure. But if you also look at, I think maybe every 5 years, there's a director that comes out of one of those schools who's starts working as a director. Other than that, people are disillusioned because they think they should be directors, and people are like, I'm not going to hire you as a director now. Now, the question is just shooting your own shorts, shooting things, which costs money, right? So, if you're going to spend $200,000 to go to film school, and, you've got $40,000 to spend on making 4 or 5 shorts that could get more recognition, with the film festivals and the this, that, and the other. I personally think that that's, somewhat of a better tool. I think how people are best served. I think at the end of the day, what separates a short, a feature, anything is story and character, right? At the end of the day, you're better off doing whatever you can to learn story, it amazes me today, the amount of kids who graduate from high school and don't know the 7 tenets of William Shakespeare, don't know, like, everything is built upon the 7 tenets of drama and comedy that he established, 400 years ago. So, it's like, I always say to people, I say to young kids who are like, I'm like, oh, do you guys like Black Panther? Like, I love Black Panther, great movie. I'm like, that's a Shakespearean tale. I said, you need to watch Hamlet in order to understand the Danish king, his uncle, and his father. It's like, and Ryan Coogler will be the first one to say that. He's like, it's a fucking Shakespearean tale. So people who understand story, and constantly write and try and shoot things, I think that's a good way to do things, because I think there's just so much expectation when you go to a film school that you're going to come out and instantaneously be inserted into the business.
Sure. No, and thank you, Luke, for that question. I just want to remind everybody watching, if anybody has questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, and we will get to them as we do in the conversation.
And if you're
Um,
currently paying a lot of money to go to film school, don't be mad at me.
Doug, kind of on that note, what's your thoughts on location for the film industry in terms of where you should be if you're just starting out? Should people move to a certain area or just get involved in their local film scene?
I think you should first get involved in your local film scene, and then when the time is right to move to another area, it will reveal itself. But there might be a lot of more play of someone who's from around here getting into the scene in Philly, hanging out with some people there, or even around here, versus thinking they got to go dive into, the waters of like LA right away. I think we were talking before we kind of went live, but I have this organization called the Film Roundtable, filmroundtable.org, if anyone wants to go there, and you'll see all of these discussions I've had with cinematographers and directors. And we did a great panel with young up and coming DPs who are all in their, late 20s. And they all kind of started out for several years, whether it was Nashville or Madison, Wisconsin, like in their backyard, doing local commercials, local music videos, and whatever this, and building a portfolio. And then, making the jump when they thought the time was right, that either A, they wanted to be into bigger waters, or B, they could maybe start to get some agent or representation because they had done certain things. I think that's going to be easier because if you're growing up someplace, you've got a, instantaneous network, of people that that either might be in the music scene or might have so-and-so who's doing a local commercial, whatever it is. I just think that you're better off starting first in your own pond before you try and move on.
Sure, that makes sense. How is, I guess, working, during the pandemic? How has the industry changed in your eyes, and how are you preparing to return to work safely?
Well, there was no working for a long time while nobody was working. And it's one of the industries now, in a lot of ways, that's the hardest hit because, it's a very difficult, we're a traveling circus, so at any given time, you've got 200 people shooting, in this building for like 2 days, or then going over here, like constantly moving around. So it's a difficult thing. I've actually been shooting. I shot a very big commercial that I just finished last week, where I was in California for about 3 weeks. And, you got to get tested every day, depending, the movie world is a lot more stringent. They've broken things down into zones, right? So depending upon the job you do and your proximity to dealing with the actors, because it's all about keeping the actors protected, because they're not wearing any face coverings, right? Because they can't put mask and shields on because it messes up the makeup. So they come to set, just normal. So it's incumbent that everyone else is as safe as possible. So it's very, it's more time consuming. It takes a lot more money. I think it's also smaller projects for a long time aren't going to be able to get insurance because the insurance premiums, like the Lloyd's of London premium against like someone getting COVID, especially if like a director or an actor gets it and you got to go down for 2-3 weeks, are pretty high. So I think it's going to affect small projects for a while until we know that we have this thing under control, because they're just not going to be able to afford in lots of ways, the insurance premium. They're either going to have to do one of two things. They're going to have to just take a flyer and not be as safe as you should, or they're not going to be able to afford what they have to go through to do the steps the right way.
Okay, gotcha. I'm curious, Doug, from your perspective, since you've worked on so many different films with a multitude of directors, what makes a good director?
A good director is it's a really good question. Because it's I've seen them both. I've seen good and I've seen bad. One, communication, right? Someone who knows how to communicate, not just with his actors, but with his department heads. The important thing on a film set is for everyone to know exactly what needs to be put in front of the camera at any given point in time. So a director has the ability to change their mind, but everyone needs to prepare for something, So communication is really important. and especially communicating with actors, right? Because, a lot of times, like my dad, when I was first started out, my dad was a cinephile, loved watching movies. And I used to talk about how hard it was to get a movie made, And he would say to me, he goes, son, if it's so hard to get a movie made, why are there so many bad ones? I said, well, nobody really starts out wanting to make a bad movie. What happens along the way is too many people mess with the script. All of a sudden, a director and an actor get in a situation and they won't talk to each other. Like I've seen all these things happen, right? And then all of a sudden it's like now you've created like a situation that's untenable for success, So and I think so directors need to be able to communicate. They need to be able to lead, and they need to, a good director needs to be able to have a good heart, in a lot of ways, because people will follow a leader with a good heart a lot longer and a lot harder than someone on the other side of the coin.
Sure. No,
Because I'm not going to say like, oh, they got to know great shit, because you have people around you, like the cinematographer for a lot of times is your shot designer. Your production designer a lot of times is the person that picks the locations based upon ideas that the director's given them. That really good directors also, the important thing I should say is also know how to surround themselves with a team that they can trust, because there's a lot of decisions to be made. And if they can have someone that have people in different departments, that help them with the shorthand of making a decision or teeing up a good decision, it's going to make them more successful.
Okay. That's a great piece of advice for everybody listening. Surround yourself with good people, good creative people. Doug,
right.
We got another question here. This is from Jennifer. Doug, would love to hear your thoughts on getting into the PGA, DGA, as I've been producing and directing on non-union projects for over 10 years in New York City and am yearning to get into the unions.
Well, the DGA is, there's two ways to get into the DGA. The easiest way to get into the DGA is to be a director, because all you got to do is pay a fee on a movie, right? So that's really the easiest way, right? If you're on a movie that's DGA signatory and you're not in the DGA, they'll pay, $17,000 or whatever the fee is now, and you're in the DGA as a director. That's the easiest way. The first AD is a long, tenuous apprenticeship, like I said. Also, UPM is the other category that the DGA covers, which stands for Unit Production Manager. In a lot of places, especially on small movies, the UPM is also kind of like the line producer, which is essentially the producer that is watching the money line. Is exactly what that means, is the day-to-day producer involved in the money decisions. As people, as you see movies, there's tons of different producers, and a lot of times the line producer goes by a title also. The executive producer is the money manager. So that's not a real route to get into the DGA, right? Because the same thing with the UPM, how you get in is either you've been a first AD for, like, I'm technically in the DGA as a UPM and a first AD because I've had the right amount of days. It's all about days to qualify that you've worked on union movies. So the PGA is a little bit of a different animal. And I don't know I can't say exactly. I mean, not every producer I work with is in the PGA, but a lot of them are. And I think it's another thing that's a fee-based structure. You pay to get into the PGA if you're a producer, and and they might have to do a review of the things that you've gotten a producer credit on to be like, okay, you're a producer of merit, you can go into the PGA. I believe that's kind of how it goes. But all these things require a little bit of a body of work, unless, of course, as I said, you're a director.
Is getting into one of those unions a goal that filmmakers should be striving for?
Yes, and the reason is because at the end of the day, what the DGA does is protect your rights as a filmmaker, right? So protect your rights for, that you're entitled as a director to X amount of weeks to cut your movie. Protect your rights in the profit sharing, right? Because there's a lot of shady, what goes, especially in the lower budget level, even I shouldn't even say just lower, and obviously in studio level as well, there's a lot of what we call creative accounting goes on. And the DGA is there to make sure that everyone gets their fair share. Like as a first AD, I collect residuals for every movie I make, so it's called, we like to refer to as mailbox money. Every now and then I get a check. It's just like being in the Screen Actors Guild. You get a check for something you did 10 years ago. And the DGA is protecting that money end of it for me as a first AD. As a director, they protect your money end of it and the creative end, that you're, given certain rights that the guild's collective bargaining agreement has put forth, so that you're protected in putting your movie together. It's very hard on a small budget for people to do that, because it's more expensive, right? You got to pay the director more, you pay the first ADs more. But as people within the industry, you want to be able to aspire to that, because it only just protects you, and also, sets you up with medical benefits, sets you up with a pension plan as you work. As I said, I've been working 25 years. I look back, I'm like, wow, I've had a career. I have a pension. I've got benefits, all these type of things that when you're, in your 20s and starting out, you don't think of, but the guilds are there so that builds for you. So when you get to a certain point, and you decide not to do this anymore, you're taken care of.
Okay. What about representation, Doug? Do you, as a AD, have any kind of representation? And if so, what's your advice on filmmakers finding representation?
So I think for sure, as a writer or as a director, you want to get representation, because it's those agents that get you in the door to meet people. And once again, it's like the chicken and the egg. Like, you're not going to get a rep until you've done something, so you got to kind of like shooting shorts, writing screenplays, all these type of things. And trust me, it's a hard nut to crack. Over the years, I've written a lot of things, and even with the connections I have, it's no means a layup. Things, it's a tough process, and it's a process that requires relentless knocking on doors, following up with people, and eventually the cream will rise to the top. There are a lot of people who are amazingly talented directors and writers whose careers don't go anywhere because they don't have the wherewithal to kind of just, keep the knocking on the door going on. So as a writer director, I say getting representation by an agency is very important. As a first AD, and they do, like, CAA, UTA, ICM, and there's a lot of my contemporaries that have representation. Personally, I don't. I had it several years ago, and I realized that I wasn't getting any new work off of it. I've gotten to the point in my career where I'm working with people because I've worked with them before, right? So there isn't someone who's giving me that new connection, so for me, it doesn't make sense. I'd rather, I'm also a little cheap that way. I'd rather keep all of I don't want to give away 10% if I'm the one lining up the job, so it's like, so I've gotten into the position where I work, and I work consistently. So personally, I haven't had to do it.
For the indie filmmakers in the audience who might have just graduated from college or are not going to college and graduating high school, what's a great day job for them to be looking for, do you think, so that they can work, on nights on their scripts and trying to get their own projects off the ground?
There's so many different things. I mean, obviously, there's always lots of people in, even though it doesn't work anymore, I was going to say the restaurant business, but anywhere, and even jobs to work, you hear stories of guys who made it as screenwriters, and they worked a job as like a night security guard at this, or a night where you could just sit and, watch us, do something very mundane and work on your stuff while you're actually getting paid, and every now and then you got to pay attention to something. So I think there's just so many things. It all depends upon, your lifestyle. What kind of money do you need? Obviously, things get more difficult once you get married, you have children, all of that jazz, or you just have children in general. But I think it's, any type of job that gives you, obviously, a job that you work 90 hours a week, all in it to win it's not going to be any good, but any job where you're like 40 hours a week and it's a little bit mundane, and during the course of that day, you're really working hard, 5-6 hours, anything like that, that also gives you, because honestly, what happens, I mean, you got your weekends, you got your nights, but sometimes you're just burnt out, so I think it's up to the individual, but you got to decide if it's a job where you can do some work while you're there, or it's just a job that gives you the right hours to be able to do some other work, or is it a job where you want to kind of come into contact with people and hear things and see things so that it spurs ideas in you, like a lot of times, we can't exist in a vacuum. You get ideas from places, and sometimes that requires interaction with other people.
Yes. Yeah. As a writer myself, sometimes I gotta remind myself to go out and about and interact with people.
Yeah, you got to put your ear to the ground and hear things. And I agree with you. I think it's, you can't just live in a bubble all the time. It's like no one, no, there aren't enough of us out there to have like a Stephen King imagination. You got to write it, kind of get out there.
And what about for people on a film set, just going onto a film set for the first time, is there a certain department that you think would be great to get involved in to get kind of a sense of what life is like as a filmmaker?
Well, the easy thing to say, because the one everyone, if given everyone's druthers, people gravitate towards camera, because that feels like such the direct line to making a movie, right? Because it's literally, here's the device that's going to shoot the scene. So, it's a lot, it's a lot more obvious than say costumes, or production design or props. I think there's so many different, and that's what I always say to people. That's why, when I was kind of, knocking on film schools, is because film schools, they teach you to be like, for the most part, like a writer, a director, a cinematographer. But the truth of the matter is, there's hundreds of other jobs on a film set, that you don't realize what they are until you maybe just start out as a PA and are like, oh, this guy's a prop guy. I like what he's doing. I'm kind of like, a DIY guy. I'm kind of like handy. Oh, I like the fact that, he's tinkering with all the stuff. He's in charge of of the watches and the cool, this, that, and the other. Oh, I like that. You don't, those type of things you don't know until you're exposed to it. And I think a film set has that ability to expose someone who starts out to a lot. You might have someone who's really into clothing and they're like, oh, I like what these costume people are doing. So I think that, it's really up to the individual. But for the most part, I do believe that, a lot of people do gravitate towards camera because it feels like the main line to the event.
Yes. And for the high schoolers in the audience, I don't think we actually defined what a PA is. So could you talk a little bit about what a PA is on set and what makes a good PA?
Yeah, a PA, which, it stands for production assistant, is the, and you will have everything from, you'll have departmental PA. So you have like a camera PA or a wardrobe PA or and then you'll have set PAs who work for the AD team, right? So they're just in charge of, getting actors to and from set, locking up the set, things like that. But it's a bunch of different jobs that kind of very entry level in all aspects of it, and puts you in a position to see how the business is done. And it's absolute entry level. Sometimes you're literally just a gopher. Even if you're like the PA for the art department, that might be involved like getting them lunch every day, and doing something else. But what you're doing is you're surrounding yourself with the people who are making the movie, and you're seeing how they do their job, and you're meeting them, and they're either taking a liking to you or not. And if they're taking a liking to you, on their next movie, they've got a slot for this. They might call you up and be like, hey, do you want to, come and do this, So it's very entry level, but it's very important. And it's very important to be absolutely engaged because, PAs, the PA, I am very fond of saying, I treat all of my PAs like gold because one day they're going to be producers that hire me. And that's absolutely the truth. I have PAs over the 25 years I've done this who've gone on to be producers and other things, and really respected how I treated them and how I taught them when they were there, and call me for jobs on their movies all the time, right? Because it's a true, there's certain things about the film business. It's an egalitarian business. The cream will rise to the top, and people that stick with it will stand out, and in the same vein, people that do a job that's not noteworthy, people are going to be like, I don't need to hire that person. But if you're able to work hard and stand out, and like I tell everyone in this day and age, I go, do not be on the phone all day. I go, that is the first sign that people on a film set do not like, when there's like, someone's just constantly like on their phone all the time, rather than listening, being engaged with what's happening on set, understanding who needs help, who needs what, because it's, that's how you see, if you see the whole, the privilege of getting onto a film set means you're there to observe how the whole machine takes place. And if you are given that privilege, you need to put yourself in a position to succeed.
Good advice. on the note with PAs, Luke writes in asking, how do you get a PA job? Is there like a Craigslist for PAs? Like, how do you find a PA job?
It's there. I think there kind of is not like a Craigslist, but every, like, for example, New York, Philadelphia, they'll have their film commissions, right? And so you go to their film commission website. The good thing about the film commission website, I haven't been there in a while, but this is the way it used to work. I remember is that you would have an idea of productions that were shooting in town, right? And then a contact, someone in information there. And usually it's like, what you do is then you reach out to like a production coordinator. It's usually like someone called the POC, the production office coordinator, is the person that handles the office, is the office manager. And early on in the production, they're the one fielding resumes, this, that, and the other. And, it's just about like going to places, finding it. Once again, it's like literally hitting the streets, going to places, sending your resume, reaching out to people, and being active, constantly being active, being with your name out there, because then, as I said, in the world of concentric circles, eventually you work with someone who then knows someone, and then you start, oh, you want to be on this reality TV show as a PA? Oh, and I think in this day and age, reality TV and stuff like that is where a lot of people start out, because they're kind of like easier gigs to get. They're constantly looking and churning, but it's a great place to get experience, to understand what goes on in terms of a shoot day. There is no such thing as a PA job that's too small when you're starting. All you want to be able to do is see how it's done and meet people.
Cool. Great advice. We have another question. This one is, with COVID-19 affecting theater chains, how do you think this is going to change how movies are made?
Well, I think that what's going to happen is the distribution model is going to change. I don't think you're going to need 24 plexes anymore. I don't think you're going to need 14 plexes anymore. I think you're going to need movie theaters that are experiential, where you've got like big tentpole movies, or big that go and play there. Probably the horror genre, which is one that is very much of a group dynamic. People love being scared in a room with 50 other people. So there are going to be specific genres and types of movies that work as the theaters become scaled down. I think the distribution aspect for streaming, a lot of the indie movies, a lot of the mid-range, call it 12 to $40 million movies, I think a lot of those things are going to go to streamer, because they're not really going to have the amount of production and marketing, publicity and marketing it takes to get a movie out there. Oftentimes in this day and age, if you're making a $20 million movie, it costs like $15 million to just market the movie, to have like a big distribution, right? So those economic models don't make sense anymore, so I think, it's going to be a lot of, Netflix and whoever just like buying up, movies that are made. Not, I think movies still have to get made and have to get financed, but the distribution of the movies is going to fall a lot onto these streaming services.
Okay. For anybody wondering too, Philly's Film Commission, their website's film.org. They're really great. I've worked with them in the past too. I forgot to mention that on the last question. Doug, how do you manage your work-life balance? Because it seems like you're working a good portion of the year on sets away from home. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's an interesting question, because I really, it's a great question, because I've been very fortunate in my family situation to have a wife that's very understanding and was with me before all this insanity began. So, I have two kids now who are 17 and 15. And over the years, as I traveled on the road, she was left home to raise the children. I did all the economic support. She didn't have to work. She could be a stay-at-home mom and raise the kids. But I was absent a lot. And, I would come home for fits and starts. If I was shooting in New York, I would come home at the end of a shoot day on Friday, play Power Dad for 30 hours, and then go back to set, go back to, a living situation Sunday night closer to set, all of that jazz. So it really wasn't until COVID, I have not had more than 1 month off in the past 12 years. So COVID really put me in a situation to stop and take stock in my life and in my and a lot of filmmakers, same way. A lot of people who just been running ragged, because always live in this fear. It's like you got to work while your name's out there, right? It's like people calling you to work, it's like you got to keep working. If you're an independent contractor, it becomes very hard to say no to things, to be like, I want to spend the month home with my kids, because you never know after that month if another job's going to come or what the situation is as a gun for hire. So, it's a lot of it has to do with having the right partner, the right things in place, and everyone kind of understanding their role and how it works out. But I've definitely, in the 4 months straight that I was home, achieved a level of understanding about how important it is to have time with your family, and, and in certain ways, I'm glad to have had that realization in this time as we were all put on ice.
Sure. Are there any changes that you're going to be making going forward when the industry opens back up?
Personally, I might be comfortable with taking a little bit more time off. Not be so afraid of saying no.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I think as filmmakers, we all dive into our work, and like you said, we're so afraid to say no to things because we don't know when the next project's going to be there. That
Yeah.
it's important to take time for yourself to recharge your creative juices too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you're a writer also, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your writing process?
My writing process. My writing process is to write when I can. I mean, the thing is, it all depends upon, I started out, earlier writing scripts as I got into this business because I wanted to become a better writer and wanted to learn how sets worked. For years I kind of put the writing on the back burner. Then I wrote a couple of scripts that I kind of got out a little bit. And for the last 4 years, I've actually been working on a TV show when I can, like a 10 episode, 1 hour thing. So that's been kind of all encompassing. And I've liked it that way because, once you get past like the third episode or so, the characters have such a life that it's an easier thing for me to get into in fits and starts. When you have multiple different storylines, you can think about something and then reverse engineer and go back episodes as you're beefing up a particular thread of a storyline. I find it cathartic to be able to, spend time thinking about it and spend time writing, and the process is fraught, like anyone else will tell you that they, writing is a hard thing to say that you enjoy. Writing is it's like a version of shock therapy. It can be great sometimes, but it's just like you don't want to start it some other times.
Yes. I can completely relate. It's it is painful, but it's like something you have to get out. It's like,
Yeah.
You don't have a choice. You have to do
And then when
it.
you get it out, you feel so great, but then it was like, it's not easy to get to that position.
Yeah, I think that's filmmaking in general. It's like almost a weird abusive relationship where, you're so proud of it at the end of the day, but you go through hell just to do it.
It's really amazing because there's a lot of writer directors that I work with, and they're always fond of saying in the writing process, the world is your oyster, because you dream it up. You're like, oh, and it's going to be like, blah, blah, you write it. And then you actually get to like prep and you start to realize, oh, we can't afford that sequence. We can't do this. So then directing becomes the world of compromise, where writing was the world of aspiration.
Nicely put. I like that. What advice would you have for the young writers in the audience?
Just keep doing it. Just keep writing, because it's a craft like anything else. And truthfully, you get better as you go. Even me, I look back at stuff I wrote, 15, 20 years ago, and I'm like, oh, wow, that's mediocre at best. It's a craft. It's a muscle that needs constant honing. You find a style, you find a way to describe things, you find a voice, you find a better ear for dialogue. But that happens through repetition, so I would just say to people, just keep writing, even if you're, and then if you're done with something, then move on to something else. Don't obsess over the one thing that you've written and spend 2 years combing over it. Just like sit it down and move on, because you might find a better story to tell, and realize that story you told then, your writing style has evolved as you're now engaging in a different story. So just keep doing it.
Well, as we move into the last half hour here before the VIP reception, everybody feel free to post your questions. Getting some great insight to the industry from Doug here. Speaking of which, Doug, I think you brought some photos along.
I did. I was just gonna say, let me share screen.
Cool.
Oh, you gotta allow me. Host disabled participant. Someone's gonna allow me to share.
I'll
So
let you
what I have is what I'm going to show is I got some photos. I thought it'd be cool to show people. I got some photos from Lost City of Z, which was a pure location movie that we shot in Northern Ireland for period England and the Colombian jungle for the Amazon. And then I also, so, you know, that was an interesting, oh, sorry.
Try it down, Doug.
Okay. Let me see. So, okay, thanks. Okay. Whoa, what is all this? Okay. Okay, hold on. One sec, guys, sorry. I used to doing this way. Stop the share, go back. The right one. All right. You guys see my desktop here yet?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Okay. You still see it?
Yep. We see your Finder window.
All right. Okay. So, sorry guys, this is like all in the way now. All right. So let me see here. You still see me, right?
Yes.
Okay. That thing is messing me up. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So first, oh, this is weird because now I only have that.
Doug, I can tell you're an AD. Your desktop's so organized compared to mine.
Well, I kind of tried to clean it up before this because I didn't want to have you guys come on and see my place a mess here. Okay, so I don't know why I can't find Lost City of Z right now. So here, okay, here's Ad Astra. So here's an interesting thing I want to talk about. So even Ad Astra as a space movie, right? And here's the interesting thing about space movie, right? You have to decide on a science fiction movie, are you going to try and reinvent the future? Are you going to build everything and say, hey, a spoon now looks different. Hey, the world looks different. How do we spend time? And what does this mean for locations? Because one, on a movie like Ad Astra, we decided we were going to build spaceships, but for other things, we were going to find locations. So, for example, you take a place like an old server room like this, that's nice and empty, and you turn it into, you know, some type of a cool, funky location. It's like you paint it white, you got this. So it's like, this is the idea of you can find things and make, like, look, this was literally just like an air vent tunnel, like in an underground hallway, right? And you shoot at it with a weird angle and you're like, look at this. This becomes like a location of some subterranean thing, like on the Martian ecosystem, right? So it's very interesting. Like, and like, this is literally like a hallway, right? That's like underground, the downtown LA Hall of Records. And you're like, wow, this is a cool concrete hallway. We can make this like, you know, something like underground in the moon, you know? So it's not like you're trying to build your whole world. So it becomes very important to creatively understand for the movie you're making what your locations bring you. This was a subterranean level of an old water plant. And this hallway, it's like 20-foot ceilings, all concrete. Actually, these little cubby holes on the side used to be, this was a storage area where they used to hold like old analog transistors for like this hydroelectric plant, right? That's now defunct. So you find these places with a very, and this is that same hallway. I love this location because it just looks like some, like, you know, Brutus architecture stuff that could be like cement. This is all like underneath Mars, like on our movie, right? Which actually most of Mars got cut out. But, you know, so here's an interesting place too. So you find something like an anechoic chamber, like this place. This is a real location. And what they do here is they test the thermal dynamics and soundproofing of windows, right? And you're like, you have a scene that's written where he has to go to a Martian communications hub to like send a laser message. And you're like, hey, look at this anechoic chamber that our location manager has found. This could be a cool place to be like, this is how you have to send radio messages on Mars, right? So the important thing here, and what I'm getting at is, even in, look, this is another just subterranean space in downtown LA where we just hung up a string of like red lights, and it becomes like another really creepy, cool, like subterranean Martian tunnel that exists. This is actually, because I'm going to show you another one, unbeknownst to a lot of people, Los Angeles used to have a subway system. So this here is old tunnels from the LA subway system, which essentially at some point in the 30s, Ford and Firestone got together and told LA that they weren't going to build a huge plant in LA if they didn't dismantle the subway system so that people could drive more cars. That's actually a true story. So they would wish now that they didn't do that. But so this is an old subway, right? Tunnel. And here it becomes like something where he's got it, we fill it up with smoke, once again, cool lighting. And it's like this subterranean thing where Brad's got to go. We built this here. This is essentially, this is like a staircase that leads up to the rocket he's got to get on. So, and this is a built set, right? So this is our spaceship. So we said, okay, we're building spaceships where we've got to be. And this is, as I was explaining before about doing zero-G work, this is one of those flat ones. So people would be in close-ups here. You simulate zero-G. See, look, this is me. You guys can see this, right?
There's the classic filmmaker hands.
Yeah, so this is filmmaker hands, me telling Brad and everyone, okay, in zero-G, you float like this. But essentially, like as I was saying, so this is a lay down set, so essentially you'd only kind of shoot close-ups here and simulate zero-G things, right? Like this is once again, me with different actors on podiums, once again, a spaceship built portion, explaining in the scene what we're gonna do, what kind of stance and positioning they should have. This is back to that Mars thing. This is still part of that underground hydroelectric plant I was telling you about. Unfortunately, this whole Martian portion of the movie ended up getting cut out. But the idea is that Mars is kind of like Las Vegas. It's like the last bastion, in the solar system. So it's a total like crazy place where anything goes. But once again, those are just. So this here is the build thing, right? The idea of how great you do things when you get great practical elements built in. This is like the module in our spaceship. This is always what it would take every time you're going to go shoot something, right? They got to put the guys in the suits. You got to make sure right here, I can guarantee you what we've done is he's unhooking him, because you can see right here that it started to fog up a little bit. And that's no good for Cameron. Anytime they would have to start to fog up, we'd have to like unhook them, vent it out. Like it's just like space movies are like a crazy thing. So look at this. So look how many people it takes in a close quarters and the spaceships were all designed similar to like the Soyuz, like space, like all like the idea of like very true and grounded in reality. They're all small, crowded shapes, not like, walking around the deck of the Enterprise or anything. But, look, this is your bare essential. Here's a guy holding a light. Here's a guy holding a mic. Here's a guy pulling focus. This guy here is on this dolly. So this dolly, he's working it up and down. So this guy is floating up and down as if he's in zero-G. And this is like a close-up over Brad. And this guy's kind of just bouncing up and down in the frame. So you cheat, like, and we're all just standing. This is no wires. So you cheat your, zero-G. This is Hoyte van Hoytema behind the camera here. Esteemed DP that you probably all know. He's Christopher Nolan's guy. Shoots all Christopher Nolan's movies.
Doug, how would that shot change now with COVID? Like what would be?
Well, everyone here would be masked up. You could still do this shot, but everyone that's close to the actor here has to be masked and shielded. So everyone in this space, and you'd have to have probably at wherever the entrance port is here, you've got to have air scrubbers, so you're sucking air in and out and scrubbing the air this is on a stage, but in this small environment, they might even tell you can't do it, like, I don't know, like that might be challenging in COVID, but I love this shot. This is James Gray here. And, Brad, just standing there listening to him as he's describing the camera move and, what's going to happen in the small space. This is a different set. This is Brad's photo double stand-in. So like the idea, like we would line up all these shots before with Brad before you brought him out. But this is what I'm talking about. See, we call this thing like a seahorse, and a guy would push this from below, and then he could float, and you could have the camera here in a close-up on him, and it would look like he's floating right through the set because he's not walking. And this is a way you do it without wires, because anytime you got to get wires in and get an actor upside down, it's like, okay, lunch, you know, your day's done. So this is an example. So this is my stunt team talking to me here, right? So this is, you know, we're talking about some wire work that's got to happen. The way this set's designed is up here where you can't see is a tube going all the way up. So actors would be strung up here and going up this tube area. This is Rob Alonzo, a great stunt coordinator, and his team. And we're kind of like talking about, you know, how we got to, you'd essentially have the guy in the suit hooked to this and he gets pulled up through the hole, right? And then the camera follows him or chases him or whatever it needs to be. See, here it is here. And then, you know, with the stunt guy. And then this would be the camera on some type of a crane. This particularly is called something known as an Oculus head, because it can turn 360 degrees and give you all kinds of crazy angles. So you could follow him and be twisting and moving all around, and it gives you a real great zero-G feel once you're following someone on wires. So this is once again going to the text. So the idea, this is Kevin Thompson, our production designer. Here's Hoyta. So, you know, this was our lunar module, right? I don't know if for any of you have seen the movie, there's a big, like kind of on the moon, there's a big car chase, a pirate's car chase. So our lunar module was all built upon the existing module of that has gone up on the moon, because this is tried and true technology that works. So this is all copied. We're not like inventing new, like, you know, buggies for the moon. This is like literally prototypical of what we left up there in 1974, but, you know, a little bit bigger, but the same type of idea with the gold foil, with these, you know, wheels. These are regular wheels that we coated in a mesh, but those wheels up there are steel wheels, because, you know, the dust on the moon is like razor blades. You know, that was always the thing they were worried about when you went to the moon, was getting dust on your suit, because it could literally tear your suit. So you couldn't, and this is all research. You do all this research, you find this out, you steal ideas, you steal prototypes, you make things. This is exactly what it looks like, you know, before we're in this kind of huge warehouse, you know, shooting the scene where essentially the guys are getting rigged up before they drive out to the moon. Now here we are on a stage, a big black box, and we're shooting all the actor coverage in a black void. They're close-ups of this lunar chase. So like the what do you call it? The buggy, like I was describing it, it's on a gimbal, so it shakes up and down, left and right. And this gives the close-up sensation that you're actually driving over the moon terrain with these guys. And then our stunt team went out to the desert in the 120-degree heat, and they did all the wide shots of driving over the moon. So here's some stunt guys, once again, rigged up in a zero-G. Like this is, I don't think this scene made it into the movie either. There was a lot of things we shot that were really dark that didn't make it into the movie. But this is the black box I was telling you about. Here I am sitting, talking about lining up a shot. We were going to strap Brad to this thing on his back, and this would be a close-up of Brad, and we just spin this around. So this is like Brad getting thrown end over end in space, and you just kind of shoot it in a black box. Then you need no visual effects, no nothing. We tried to do the least amount of visual effects possible in this movie. A lot of it was shot in black boxes to simulate space when they're out in space. And even in all of our ships, there's no green screen, no blue screen. It was just black void out there, and we did single source to emulate the sun coming in. Okay, so that's, I wish I had the other movie here, but all right, so that's Ad Astra. So I thought people get interesting to see that, because even though it's a space movie, you need to get real locations too, because you're not building everything, you know?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing that. It's incredible seeing the different techniques that you used on the film. I had no idea about the seahorse. That's really cool. Is that a common technique in other sci-fi space movies?
It's, you know, it's funny. Hoyta had shot Interstellar, so he came to us with all these things that him and Nolan did, you know, and some of the close-up stuff, because, you know, once again, you know, getting actors on wires is death. So you develop all these things to cheat the idea of, you know, how to move people in mediums and close-ups, because the only time you really need to put anyone on a wire is when you're showing the expanse of the module.
Sure. No, that's awesome. As we wrap things up here, Doug, do you have any other advice that you want to leave people with?
You know, yeah, I mean, all I'll say is, you know, if you want to be a writer, write. If you want to be a director, direct. You know, there's, you know, you don't, no one gets out of the gate, you know, with a studio gig or lining up a feature. Like just small things, shorts. If animation's your thing, do that. Whatever your thing is, because you know this is a real hard business, and you're gonna make no money for a long time. So you gotta love it. You got to love it. And then one day, what's going to happen is you're going to get accolades for something. And the amazing thing about this business is that people spend a lifetime becoming an overnight success. So, you know, if it's really something you want to do and you're passionate about it, just keep doing it. Just keep with it.
And what would be the biggest piece of advice you would give your younger self about what you've learned?
I would say my younger self, write more, you know, maybe spend a little bit more time with my family. If you know, but I know that that was difficult because early in my career I had to just do everything I could. um, and then maybe and not be afraid to you know, there's a couple times when I was afraid to take chances and I took the safe thing rather than taking a chance on something, on a project. I would say to my younger self, don't be afraid to take chances.
Great advice. And speaking of younger selves, we have one last question here from Billy. What was it like to work with young actors who then make it to big blockbuster movies like Lost City of Z with Tom Holland and Robert Pattinson?
Well, you know, I mean, Rob was already very established because of the Twilight movies. But Tom was, you know, he was young. He just, I think he either just got Spider-Man or he got it while we were shooting. And Tom's a great Tom is who he is, you know. He's a great natural being. I mean, the true nature of, you know, actors who are themselves and, you know, true good people stay that way, you know. Uh you know, and um they don't change necessarily just because now, you know, you're a superhero or you're this, you know. And matter of fact, a lot of them kind of, you know, wish that they could go back before they were, you know, became so iconically known as certain characters, you know, even though I'm sure they all enjoy the paycheck. But you know, the truth of the matter is that, you know, I think what's great for the young actors like that do end up getting into the franchises of Marvel is if they use it as Chris Pine did, as a way to really do what their heart wants them to do and tell smaller stories. Like Mark Ruffalo is the same way. A lot of these guys, they have that big paycheck and then they do like the $1 million movies or the small indies, this, that, and the other, because that's where their passion projects lie, you know? So I have a lot of respect for those actors, because it's like, yeah, you know, they do what they got to do so their family can be comfortable, but they really have a passion for making small stories.
Great. And one last question that I'm curious about for the other filmmakers in the audience. Are there any filmmaking resources online that you'd recommend that people check out?
Resources. Well, obviously, I mean, you know, I mean, a Bible for the film industry is IMDb, but that just tells you who did what. But it's also very good as a resource if you're trying to find people, right? I would tell people, you know, pay for the subscription to IMDb Pro. It's got a big contact base in there for agencies, production companies, and also direct contacts for, you know, certain people at production companies. So it's a great resource if you're looking to reach out to someone for whatever reason. If you're looking to find an agent, if you're looking to send query letters to production companies, to people, you know, IMDb is a great resource to give you that contact base, probably better than anything else out there. You know, so spend whatever it is the year for the IMDb Pro, and that gives you access to the database of contacts.
Great. Well, Doug, thank you so much for coming and speaking with all of us today. It was really incredible learning about your life and your career and just the knowledge that you had to share. So thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate you guys for inviting me. You know, and I said, this is great. However, you know, often I can help as this thing goes forward. You know, I'd always love to do it. So thanks for having me.
Brad, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate it. Thank you, Doug, for being here today. And thank you for everybody participating today in this event. It was very, very fascinating. maybe I'll become a filmmaker now. But it is really cool. We had a really good time. We recorded this and we'll put it up on our website so more people can watch and take some of these great tips. Also want to thank CNN and our other event sponsors.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Doug. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.